Auburn's recruiting under Hugh has been aggressive, to say the least. Last year's top commitments: Cam Coleman, Amaris Williams, DeMarcus Riddick, Jamonte Waller, Perry Thompson. What did they all have in common? They were all flips. That's what Hugh does. And in this video, I got Auburn insider Jeffrey Lee here. We're going to talk more Auburn flips. But first, let's get this page to 50K. Come on, they gave me a soundboard. I know we can get the page to 50K. Hit subscribe for me, please. All right, let's bring on the great Jeffrey Lee from Auburn Live. We're talking Auburn flips. And if we're going to talk flip talk with Auburn, how can we not start at the top with quarterback JuJu Lewis? Now, he's been committed to USC. I think one of the major developments in this recruitment, to be honest with you, has been Georgia taking Ryan Montgomery and essentially taking the dogs out of this recruitment. Right now, I'd say all eyes are on Auburn when it comes to flipping a potential flip of JuJu Lewis from USC. How are you seeing this one play out right now?
Completely agree, Josh. I really do. You know, things have been kind of slow, kind of quiet with JuJu the last couple of weeks, and that's probably a good thing for Auburn because, you know, leading up into the last couple of weeks, there's been a lot of buzz about Auburn with Julian Lewis, and it remains that way to this day. You know, he's set to come in for an official visit in June, and I would think, you know, a decision one way or the other would come soon after. And I completely agree with you about Georgia being out of the picture, leaving Auburn, USC, you know, maybe Colorado, maybe Alabama, but it certainly feels like, at least right now, that he either sticks with USC or flips to Auburn.
All right, so spring visit time is kind of over. We're prepping for summer visit. We're in that transitional time of May. Do you think that we see JuJu Lewis on campus again before his scheduled official visit, or will that be the next time you expect him at the Plains?
I expect him for an OV, but I wouldn't be surprised. These guys bring in official visits. I mean, unofficial visits. They'll just show up. Julian is about, you know, an hour and a half from Auburn, so it's not that long of a drive. He could easily pop down here, and you probably wouldn't know it if he did.
All right. Well, we'll see what happens. You know, you got to expect JuJu Lewis at some point is going to want to put this recruitment to bed and have a final decision, whether that's sticking with USC and helping build the Trojans recruiting class or flipping to another program. So do you think that could come after official visits happen?
Absolutely. You know, both of those coaching staffs, whether it be USC or the field, want this kid in their class helping recruit because he could be a huge domino for whomever's class he sticks in or flips to.
Obviously, you know, committed to the USC Trojans, but how would you kind of rank the competition with Auburn, with Colorado, you got a couple programs in there that are really trying to dig their hooks into this recruitment. Where do you put Auburn?
I put Auburn squarely at number 2, confidently at number 2. Boom. I don't have a soundboard, but I appreciate the effect. I do. You know, and from talking to several people on Julian's side of things, talking to people on Auburn's side of things, I'm hearing the same thing from both sides, which leads me to believe that, you know, Auburn's number 2, and I say that confidently. Sure, Colorado's still in there, Alabama still hanging around, obviously USC with Lincoln Riley, but I would have Auburn number 2, and I think everybody else below that. I don't know that there's a 3 or a 4. But I do think USC, Auburn 1 and 2 right now, and not a lot of difference.
All right, now let's move down the list here to running back Alvin Henderson. He snuck out of Elba, Alabama, and committed to Penn State all the way up in the Northeast. Now, Bama and Auburn were both players in this recruitment. Alvin Henderson obviously chose the Nittany Lions, but do you think this one is over?
Not at all. Not at all. And, you know, leading up to that announcement, we all heard, you know, behind the scenes that he was leaning Penn State. And I felt confident that he was going to commit to Penn State, but I kept my RPM, my prediction on Auburn, because in the end, I think he does end up at Auburn. He's wanted to be at Auburn for so long. Boom. And, you know, Derek Nix and these guys have come in and made him, continued to have him as a top priority. The thing about Alvin, if you go back and listen to his pre-commitment interview, I think it was with Chad Simmons, he said something, I'm going to be keeping an eye on Auburn this year. Right. And I think what Alvin's saying by that is, and I've talked to some people behind the scenes about this, you know, he's saying, you know, when you talk about Hugh Freeze's history and his offense, you know, everybody can name me quarterbacks. Everybody can name me wide receivers that have flourished in his system. How many running backs can you name? And I was like, man, that's a good question. Because I can't name any. So I think his concern with Auburn and Hugh Freeze is the running backs and how he would be utilized. And I think that's what he was saying pre-commitment is I'm going to be keeping an eye on Auburn. Now, I think what he's saying is I'm going to watch Auburn, how they use Jarquez Hunter, how they use Damari Alston, Jeremiah Cobb, Brian Battie, and then I'll make my final decision.
So you think this is a long-term flip opportunity?
Sure, I do.
All right. Now let's move down to the next one. This one, just follow me here. Defensive lineman Antonio Coleman. Could there be another flip in the works? Guys, if you haven't been following this recruitment, it's one of the craziest so far this cycle. Ready? He committed to Alabama in September of 2023. Flips to Auburn in December of 23. Flips back to Alabama on March 2nd, 2024. And now we're going to put him on Flip Watch. Well, I don't want to say Flip Watch, but we're going to include him in this Flip Talk segment. Is it really possible for Antonio Coleman to flip again to Auburn?
It really is. Believe it or not. He is, he has come back since his visit since his recommitment to Alabama. He's been back at Auburn. He's given Auburn all the right vibes to at least give them hope, optimism that there is potential there for yet another flip. I think we'll see him back in Auburn several times as an OV. I think we'll see him several times during the season on unofficial visits. The big thing there was Jeremy Garrett, the former defensive line coach at Auburn, leaving after the season and going to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Well, Vontrell King-Williams took over, who was Jeremy Garrett's assistant, but Vontrell King-Williams had been recruiting these kids just as much as Jeremy Garrett has, so that relationship was there. And I believe that relationship there, as well as the need for Auburn for that defensive line, is going to be big. It's going to keep Auburn in this. And if I were coming out with a commit watch list for long term, I think Antonio Coleman would be fairly high. I think top half of my list.
All right. Well, hey, at least if he does flip back to Auburn, then Hayes Fawcett won't have to draw up another graphic. He already has one. All right. One more that could possibly flip from USC is edge Isaiah Gibson. Really interesting prospect, the number 2 edge in the country from Warner Robins High School. And he committed to USC on March 24th, and it shocked pretty much every team in the South. Georgia, Auburn, Alabama, they were all recruiting him heavily, and then he pulls the trigger to USC. Do you think that this one's going to stick?
I do not. And, USC had that run of commitments there right at the early spring. They had a run of commitments. A lot of guys from the Southeast committing to USC, and including JuJu Lewis being there from the Southeast. But I think he's going to be one to watch. Now, I would put him on my commit flip watch list. But, Auburn's dealing with a lot of other guys here. You're dealing with Georgia. You're dealing with Oklahoma. You're dealing with some stud here, some elite programs here that are recruiting at a high level. Now, not to take anything away from Auburn, because they too are recruiting at a high level, and they're going to get Isaiah Gibson back on campus in June, I believe, for an official visit. So they're a player for sure, and I would have him on my flip watch list, probably bottom half, but certainly on there.
All right, we will continue to track that one. Now, Malik Arry, this is an interesting one. Over the weekend, the Auburn commitment, defensive line Auburn commitment, took a visit over the weekend to Ohio State. Do you feel like there's a good chance he could flip?
A good chance? No. A chance? Yes. There you go. Throw it up.
I had to use the buzzer once.
But definitely a chance, Josh. But I tell you, the one school I would be more concerned with if I'm an Auburn fan is, he's visiting Ohio State, but Florida has been on this kid since he committed, never relented, and he's been down there several times. It feels like if he's not at Auburn, he's down in Gainesville. So I'm keeping a close eye on Florida with him. Now, of course, he's like a lot of these kids. When he's talking to the Auburn reporters, he's saying all the right things. He's saying all the right things, and he's getting on Twitter and he's tweeting all the X, and he's posting all the right things. But there's got to be at least a slight level of concern if you're Auburn when this kid keeps going back down to Gainesville. Visiting other schools is probably going to happen, but I think Florida is your main competition there when it comes to Malik Arry.
So just in general, I named all those guys at the top of this video that had flipped last cycle. Do you think that Hugh Freeze and the staff are going to be as aggressive with the flips in 2025?
I don't know that they'll have to be. I think in 2024, they were working behind. They were a new staff. They came in December, didn't really get finalized there till late in that 2023 class. So they were playing catch up to a lot of these kids who were making commitments in the spring and the early summer. And Auburn had been there. This staff had been there for 4 or 5 months. So they were having to go back and flip these kids and get back in these recruitments. This cycle and next year will be completely out, but they're still, a little bit behind. You know how recruiting gets. If you're not recruiting 2 years in advance, you're not doing it right. So I don't think they will be doing as much flipping. I don't think they're going to be. They'll have to do as much flipping as they did last year, but certainly will. Some of these early guys, like the guys we mentioned, Derek Smith is another guy who's committed to Alabama that Auburn continues to recruit. Naeem Offord from Birmingham, the 5-star cornerback's committed to Ohio State. Auburn's continuing to recruit.
That'd be a big one.
Yeah. So not as heavily, not as much because they're not forced to, but certainly going to be working that flip watch list for sure.
All right. Well, Jeffrey Lee from Auburn Live, thank you for dropping by with all this flip intel. And you guys in the comment section below, how we feeling about these big flips? Who's Auburn going to get? Auburn fans, tap in. Let me know. Comment section below. Well, you've made it to the end of today's video, but there's hundreds more videos on the On3 Recruits channel for you to check out. And also, while you're here, hit subscribe.